All I know is that I try to, in my own work, is achieve something that I feel really happy with and feels right for the project.
Hi there everybody, here is Mario. Welcome to another episode of Design Interview 10 Questions, where we interview designers and design experts from all around the world. Today's guest is Catherine Griffiths from New Zealand. So thank you, Catherine, to be here. It's a pleasure.
Thanks, Mario. It's lovely to be invited.
You're welcome. So if you don't mind, I would start with the initial question, which is, what made you become a designer?
Yes, I don't think, I can't think of anything that made me become a designer. It's not that simple, and I guess it was interesting listening to Leonardo, actually, who said he doesn't like the question, and I understand that, but I think the point is that it's perhaps, in my case anyway, hard to pick a time when that happened. And we studied art at school. We didn't really know about design. This was in the 70s and early 80s. And it was in my final year at school that it was suggested to a small group of us that we could apply for a very a special design school in Wellington. At the time, it was quite hard to get into, and you had to submit a portfolio. And it was through that process of making the portfolio that design became a kind of a word that started to enter my vocabulary, I guess, which sounds maybe strange that I reached this point in my life in New Zealand, in Aotearoa. But design wasn't really a profession that we knew about, and it was certainly a mystery. So when the opportunity came to apply for the school, I recognized, I guess, aspects of the criteria and and what they were wanting to do as something that I was really interested in. Having grown up with parents who were, my mother was a musician in an informal manner. She taught music and she still plays to this day, viola. My father's an engineer, and I grew up with parents that where we made things, we did things all of the time. So we were building objects, we were working in the workshop as young children, making things. Building boats, actual life-size boats, but toys and various other things. My mother sewed all of our clothes. So through the sewing, and of course we learned to sew, so through those practical activities, I guess, of sewing, building, making, and imagining, I think through that I probably developed a sense of design, but not knowing that at the time. Very long answer to your question.
You define yourself as a typographer, artist, educator, writer, activist, and feminist. So I was wondering, what is design for you? Is a kind of container for all these disciplines, or is it something different?
Yeah, it's certainly something different, I think. For me, design is a very wide word. It encompasses many things, and the descriptions that I've used as a way to kind of tag myself are probably more about the activities that I'm engaging with, irrespective of being a designer. Typography is actually probably that's the strong thread through my practice, whether it's as an artist, if you like, and the artist, I only recently probably used that word attached to my work since making work that is possibly more consistently seen in an art context, but with a typography thread to it. The writing, yes, writing on design, but writing quite often in a way that is meditative. It's thought pieces. It can be critical at times, and probably is around design, but also actually is quite personal in that sense too. So yeah, it's quite hard to define these adjectives, if you like, with a particular discipline. But I think these things contribute to my practice.
We just said that you are active on different fields. So, what do you think you create as a designer behind like the surface of your artworks? Also, because especially for you, your posters, for example, about feminist, has a really important role, not just for the aesthetic part.
I'm not sure if I'm going to answer your question in the right way. So, I mean, design, I mean, I'm working, look, I trained as a designer, as a graphic designer. I trained in visual communication design, and I think that training, that's where my work is rooted. It's in graphic design, visual communication particularly, and it's that narrative, if you like, that comes up in across most of my work. So I'm communicating ideas, whether it's in graphic design, typography, protest posters. I'm using design as my tool. I guess that would be a good way to describe the work I make. The posters are really pure graphic design, typographic, always with the typography line to them, and language. So language is another part of my work. Working with words, playing with words, meaning, yeah. And so the posters kind of bring those aspects together really well in terms of graphic design. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Instead, regarding like your projects in general, there is always a process. And is there a specific part of the process that you are really interested into, or like is all the process that interests you?
These are really hard questions. I've been going through them and thinking they're very wide questions. And when I read this one, I guess the notes I made were around the process for me is probably first, if I'm thinking in terms of graphic design and commercial graphic design, the process would be listening and taking on as much information as I can, but allowing myself to respond within myself intuitively already. So very quickly I start responding in my mind as to how things could sort of work in design terms. So the process, and one thing I say to clients, for example, is to give me the brief. Don't be so prescriptive, but I need to know all of the rules of the game, if you like, or your needs, what you're needing, what you think you want, and but not how you might achieve that. And then walking away and having the time to process that, probably without thinking too much, but allowing that to ingest and just kind of well, I guess I do spend time thinking. I spend time with it. I may not produce something straight away, but in my mind there's a lot going on. Making is part of that, but allowing the space to do that process. It's very hard for me to talk about these things in specific ways because I don't think I function in a specific way. I don't have a set of rules I follow. I don't fit the box in terms of how I practice as a designer. I tend to very intuitively work, and then I bring a kind of, I guess, the thought process to that will follow, and perhaps we can't even describe that now. I can't really explain my process, although I could yes to others for the purpose of learning how to perhaps go from one point of the design process through to the other end.
So basically, you mainly follow also your intuitions while you're designing a project.
Absolutely. Yeah, very important part of my way of working, and that intuition is a very important part. I recognize it, and I can trust my instincts. So I've learned, and again going back to, I've been working for 35 years, or when did I graduate? 1986, so 34 years, and through that time, I've learned how to be a designer. I've learned the practice. I've gained skills, and probably, it took me some time to reach a point where I could trust my own instincts and responses to problems, and then coming up with solutions around that. Also, I think a really important part of this is, and in my case, is being able to take risks. So in saying that, taking a risk, being able to let go of, or to go into a space that you may feel uncomfortable with your ideas, like pushing boundaries and just saying what happens if something happens, if you do this. So the sort of what if. And I think why I can probably take the risk is I'm prepared to do that because I know it feels right. I think there's a lot of things feel right. I know when things don't feel right, and this is something that with our students or with people I work with the workshops that I run, the typographic workshops here in the studio actually, which I've run 6 of them now, and usually with another designer from someone else, somewhere in the world or from here. And the point of that, the workshops, the typographic workshops, is to give people the opportunity to work in a space outside of their usual space, and to allow them to go somewhere they might not otherwise go in their normal daily life of practicing as a designer. And it's encouraging that sense of experimentation, I guess, exploration, but also being able to trust your instincts with what you're doing. So, yeah, it's a very important part of the process if you can find it. And then we have to rationalize that later.
And in design, do you think perfection exists?
Yeah, perfection, that's a big word. And I think it was interesting listening to Sarah Snaith and Leonardo Snolli, the 2 interviews I have chosen to listen to. I decided I wouldn't listen to any of the other ones until after we'd done our interview. So I have no clue what others have have spoken to on this, but it was interesting to listen to both of them respond to that, and I think both are right, or have points of view that I would agree with, where perfection is almost a moment in time relating to the project at the time, and it might be perfect for its time, but later falls out of that perfection, if you like. So, and also perfection, it really depends on what is perfect. Who decides what is perfection, and what is perfection? So it could be any number of things, and I think it's almost in the eye of the beholder as to whether something is perhaps perfect or not. If you're thinking about perfection in terms of your own work, I think it's probably very hard to go there, and I think we're very critical of our own work. As with your own work, one would be very critical of that. I don't know. Maybe there are people who think they make the perfect piece, and perhaps they do. But that's not really a focus around, certainly not a focus here. All I know is that I try to, in my own work, is achieve something that I feel really happy with and feels right for the project.
I mean, you started studying graphic design in a pre-digital era, and today instead, I mean, everything is changed a lot. What do you think about contemporary design?
That's another wide question. What do I think about contemporary design? I mean, I don't really think about it as such. In that, I mean, I don't. Contemporary design, it's so wide. There's a lot of design out there. There's a lot of, I don't feel as excited about design as I probably did in my younger days. I think that, we've seen some of the greatest design made, and that to sort of match that now is probably more challenging, if that's the point. Contemporary graphic design or contemporary design, in terms of where it is and what it is doing, I think is extraordinary. There are incredible pieces, objects, UX design. There's all sorts of design going on that is we haven't seen before, and I think there's a place for all of that. There's great work happening out there. I don't know. I'm not answering this question particularly well.
But
we might have to do this interview all over again.
No, but do you think?
I don't know. It's a difficult one.
Do you think maybe like today in the contemporary scene, like the design world is a bit saturated, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. It's overwhelming, and I just think there's, I come from. I mean, I studied design. I was a young designer in the day when it was more of a mystery. People didn't know what we did necessarily, and they didn't know how we got from, a piece of typed copy to producing, a poster or a brochure or a report or something. So that journey between the content to the end design piece was a mystery on the outside. Now it is a democratic space. Anyone can do that. So in a sense, the computer, the internet, the way we are now, it's democratized design, actually, and made it accessible. Anyone can work in this space. so therefore you get the rest of the world. You get everybody, you get the gamut, you just get a whole lot more. So you'll always have the best designers or the most talented designers, or the most, there is the work that is most crafted, or there's always going to be the number of people who make great work, who stand out. They'll never, that will never change. It's just that there is so much more to be swamped with, to wade your way through to see, to find those pieces.
And do you think one of the main reasons for this, like as you defined, overwhelming design, is the impact of internet that had on the design world?
Yeah, I think so. Oh, of course. I mean, the internet has opened up access, and now we see everything on the internet. From we know this conversation. Before the internet, it was magazines, books, posters, objects, and then actual people. So even you couldn't even, well, you could, you'd have to go and meet designers or go and talk to them, find them, and that's what we used to do. So being in New Zealand, and if you're wanting to engage with what you're reading in these international magazines and journals, you actually had to travel to find them. And I think that's very different. It's very different now, and in fact, that would make what I do and where I come from very different to a young person probably wanting to go into that space. So there are some fantastic young people doing some very interesting work in publishing now, and in design, who have come out of the internet generation, I guess. So, I think there's good and there's bad in both spaces.
I mean, we said before that you are an educator, and also you mentioned that you run workshops about typography in your studio with external guests. How do you see the design education? Because until now, like, I interviewed people from mainly Europe and from Asia, but from the New Zealand scene, I never interviewed anyone. So I was wondering, how is the design education over there?
Right. Well, I mean, I'm an outsider on that, in that sense, in that I've always looked at design education and from the outside. So I've been a practitioner for all of this time until this year. I took up a position teaching at Victoria University in Wellington, which is not here. So I was commuting until recently, and beforehand have been always teaching or doing lectures at various universities and institutions, art schools, and so on, here and overseas. And it was always very nice to just walk in and share with the students about, and get a sense of what the schools are doing. And I think, I mean, these days here, apart from a couple of schools, the whole education system in design is based around a financial model of, the universities needing to make money or wanting to make money. And so if you've got that as your kind of starting point, and that is the reason why they've suddenly invented a design school, and then you've got someone, and to counter that, you've actually got an established school, which might be smaller, it might be quite specific, and that's where you probably get some really great quality teaching and learning going on. The larger schools, I mean, I don't have I can't give an opinion on this, but I think that there's a really an appetite here for design education, but it's so strongly set around you have to pay. It's not a free education, so then it's aimed at those that can afford to go, and therefore you don't get the wider group of students that you might otherwise. So you're not tapping into some of the talent that's out there, or the cultural mix that you might want, or the demographics, and so then it's a certain voice of a student that comes through, perhaps, than a wider voice that you might get.
And in your career, I mean, we know that you took like the space in the society, not just as a designer, but also as an activist. And somehow I have the feeling that nowadays is also common that people start to fight for what they feel right. And so the designer is not just like the designer we all know, but is becoming like a more independent figure and with other disciplines. So what do you think about the role of the designer will have in the future?
Right. Well, I mean, the role of the designer, I think the one thing that will remain, or a really important thing, is that is to communicate, and that is the point of design and a designer is to communicate. So I can't see that. I don't see how that can change, and I think that there is a place for, obviously, for communication to continue in the future. It's more, what is important. I mean, it was interesting listening to Leonardo and his points on, what's important at the moment, and his comment was to stay at home. It's having I think what's really important is being cognizant of other people and being more aware of who is in the world and who is around you, so that there's a more empathetic response, perhaps, in design. It's perhaps less ego and more, more meaningful design. That's where I think designers could make a difference if they start to work in a more authentic, genuine, meaningful way than perhaps portfolio pieces or what's cool. I don't know. That's a hard one.
Do you think like is becoming more independent? Because we often see like smaller studio, like 1 and 2 people, instead of like big agencies. So also because maybe the designer needs to say what he wants, like in his way, and not like being under another designer.
All right. Yeah. Well, I mean, everyone's different, and if are you suggesting then that there's the future is for more of an independent voice from designers than representing perhaps the purpose of the project and therefore the client and so on? So some designers are inserting their voice more into their work. Is that what you're suggesting? I mean, I just want to say that, you know, I think it's really important for the designer, a graphic designer, whatever, that their function is to convey a message or to communicate, and you can create your own voice and visual language through your work, but I think it's important that that isn't stamped onto the work. Well, then, you know, there are some great examples of designers who have a signature style, obviously, but it doesn't get in the way of the message. So I think you have to be very clever with that. If you have a style that you're using, it's your voice, and you can still communicate the message, then that's successful, I think. I don't know. Mario, I can't do this interview. We're going to have to do it all over again.
No, but I mean, it's fine.
Oh, no, it's just, I don't know. Keep going.
And we arrived to the last question, which is, what do you think the design world can do in this moment for this global pandemic? Do you think we can help in some way?
Yeah, I think that was the question I was meaning before about the stay home, that we can just all stay home and save lives. But no, seriously, I think, it's probably what I was alluding to before, which is that it's time perhaps for designers to think about what they are doing and what it means, what they're actually producing, and how that affects people. How communicating can clearly and in a way that addresses problems and issues in a more constructive and positive way would be useful. We can't change the world, but we can help. We can help channel information clearly and in a way that might shift, may make change, or whatever the purpose of the work is. Yeah.
So maybe is a point where we can restart.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we could have less designers in the world. Could be useful. No, I don't really mean that. Restart. We've just gone into level 3. So we've just gone out of our lockdown alert level 4, which was the full lockdown, and we're seeing people coming into this next stage, and probably abusing the space. Like they don't respect what the government is necessarily wanting to do, and the restrictions that are still in place. And it's really concerning, and I'm quite nervous that we will just revert. I hope not, and I hope that I think there's a lot of there is a lot that people have taken from this time, and there's been a lot of revelation or discovery, and perhaps more empathy, and we're seeing some incredible gestures and acts of generosity happening from the grassroots right through to our wonderful Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, who is extraordinary, and she is a role model for all, and we're very lucky to have her. So it would be amazing if we could hold on to the things that really matter, and hold on to the messages and think about what those mean looking forward. And if designers can be part of that and help facilitate those ways and means, then that would be a big contribution to the future. But I'm not sure how that would work. We're small here, and we have, it's a challenge, I think, in our society. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Catherine. It was nice to talk to you.
Look, it's lovely to meet you, Mario, and yeah, very nice. And thank you also to Sarah she was the one that contacted you, I think, and encouraged this interview.